If you traveled back in time, why on earth would you go to Salem in the late 1600s of all periods? You could have gone to meet your grandma in her younger days, or you could have traveled to the point when the Statue of Liberty still had that shiny copper color. But no, you went to Salem in the late 1600s, so enjoying the past is already out of the equation. All that's left is knowing how the people in here would all turn on you in the name of superstition. And of course, would you survive? I don't think so, but here are some cases that might be a know-how. George Jacobs Sr. Georgie was a cranky old farmer in his 70s who lived in Salem Village, and he wasn't shy about calling the witch trials a sham. Good for him, and bad for him, both at the same time. While the rest of the town was spiraling into full-blown hysterics, George was one of the few standing around saying the whole thing was nonsense, which, to be clear, was enough back then to make people think you were in league with Satan. So naturally, it didn't take long before some of his neighbors and even his own family started pointing fingers at him. In May 1692, several people, including some of the Putnam clan, accused him of witchcraft. Just to give you a little context on who the Putnams were, they were the drama queens of Salem. That's about it. Anyway, then came the biggest punch to the gut. His granddaughter, Margaret Jacobs, testified against him, under oath, in court, saying her grandpa was in on the witchy business. She later said she was pressured into it, and yeah, even I wasn't surprised that she was. Were you surprised? Why? This was a time when the court basically told you, either rat someone out or we assume you're a witch too. And she was a scared teenage girl caught in all of this. George was tried, convicted, and sentenced to hang. He got what he did not deserve on the 19th of August 1692, during one of the busiest days of annihilation that year. 4 others swung with him, and I'll probably get into them as well deeper into the video. What's wild is that George Jacobs Sr. wasn't buried in any cemetery. His body was quietly taken by his family, who knew better than to ask permission, and buried on their farm. That's how ashamed and scared people were. They couldn't even give the man a public grave without risking getting accused themselves. For years, that grave was unmarked. In fact, it wasn't until over 300 years later, in the 1990s, when some of his remains were found during renovations, that he finally got a headstone. The man's own words, reportedly, were, "Well, burn me or hang me, I will stand in the truth of Christ," which honestly might have been the most punk rock thing anyone said during the whole mess. The dude stood his ground even when everyone around him folded like wet cardboard. Okay, so will you survive if you call BS on the entire witch trial thing during that time? Of course not. It's like being against North Korea while you're in North Korea and you're a North Korean. Reverend George Burroughs, the second George in this and the other George that was with the first George during the Judgment Day. George Burroughs was once the minister for Salem Village, but his time there didn't end with hugs and farewell cakes. He got into it with some of the local power players, surprise, surprise. It was the Putnams once again. He left town around the late 1680s without finishing his business. That business being unpaid salary and a pile of personal debts. Basically, the village stiffed him, he left, and the Putnams weren't thrilled about it. So, when the witch panic hit a few years later in 1692, the Putnams saw their shot and dragged his name right back into town, only this time, it wasn't to preach. At that point, Burroughs was living in Maine, trying to live a life far away from Salem's drama. But the Putnams accused him of being the grand ringleader of all the witches, like he was running some demonic pyramid scheme from the woods of Maine. The authorities, eating up every accusation like it was gospel, had him arrested and shipped back to Salem in chains. His trial happened on the 5th of August, and you can guess how fair that was, especially when your prosecutors are your old enemies and the evidence is mostly ghost stories. During the trial, the same nonsense that doomed most of the accused came back again. Things like spectral evidence. You know what that is in legal terms? Hearsay. Kids and other victims said they saw Burroughs' ghost doing creepy things like attending Satan's meetings. Add that to the fact that he was a strong guy because he lifted a heavy musket with one hand, which people in town claimed meant he had supernatural strength. I guess that was enough to be on par with the underworld. Real, airtight logic. Also, just being a minister didn't help him. In fact, it worked against him. People figured if Satan wanted to mess with the world, who better to use than a former minister? He was sentenced to die and got a noose around his neck at the same day as George Jacobs Sr., 19th of August 1692. But Burroughs did something right before his death that threw a huge wrench into the whole "he's totally a witch" story. From the gallows, with the noose already around his neck, he recited the Lord's Prayer bar for bar. That was supposed to be impossible for witches. Like literally, everyone believed if you were in league with Satan, your mouth would burn or your tongue would tie up if you tried to say it. But Burroughs crushed it, said the whole thing perfectly, and left the crowd confused as heck. Even Cotton Mather, one of the big-time witch hunt cheerleaders, had to quickly step in and tell everyone not to second-guess the execution or get all sentimental, because hey, just because someone sounds like a holy man doesn't mean he isn't a demon in disguise, right? Turns out, you also won't survive if you were a minister that had unpaid salary and all the odds were stacked against you. Who could have known? Mary Parker. Mary Parker was a widow in her 40s living in Andover, Massachusetts during the Salem Witch Trials. You're not going to believe how she got caught up in all of this. It was purely because someone confused her with another woman who had the same name. One of the girls claiming to be afflicted by witches threw out the name Mary Parker during a hysterical outburst. That was all it took. The authorities locked on to the Mary Parker they could get their hands on, which was the subject at hand from Andover, without even bothering other possibilities. They were like,
"Are you Mary Parker?"
Yes? What's up?
Witch!
Mary Parker wasn't exactly an uncommon name, and even she knew that. She immediately told the court there was another Mary Parker in town, which was true, but the girls said no, this was the one. And just like that, the court didn't bother checking too hard. Logic wasn't really in season during the trials. The accusation alone was bad enough, but once you were named, it was nearly impossible to shake it off. Mary kept trying to explain the mistake. She told them flat out they had the wrong person, that the girl must have been talking about someone else. But once those girls went into their possessed twitching and screeching mode, the court just nodded along like it all made sense.
It was her! I saw her in my dreams! She was the one who bewitched me! Good evidence. Yep. This is the Mary Parker.
So, even if Mary Parker had actual proof she wasn't the one they meant, it wouldn't have mattered. One judge, one bad day, and boom, you were done. On the 17th of September, they officially put her on trial. It didn't take long. Trials back then weren't exactly built for fairness. They were built for speed and drama. Mary got the same treatment as all the others. Witnesses seeing invisible devils, the usual recycled lies, and a total lack of real defense. She was condemned to hang, along with 7 others. It was all over by the 22nd of September. That's how fast things moved. One week, you're a free woman trying to explain a mix-up. The next, bye-bye. Her case stuck out later because of how indubitably stupid it was. Even among all the other garbage accusations, this one felt especially lazy. It's very likely she was executed purely because someone got the name wrong and nobody cared enough to double-check. Like, imagine dying because the court couldn't be bothered to say, wait, which Mary Parker? That's the level of brilliance we're talking about here. Mary Parker didn't get any justice in her lifetime. Her name only popped back up years later when people started realizing the trials were a circus. Historians now point to her case as one of the clearest examples of how out of control everything got. Now, do you have a name so common that it could be someone else's name in the 1600s? Yes? Well, don't even bother time traveling here, because the moment you step out of that machine, to the gallows you go. Mammy Red. Real name, Wilmot. She was an older woman from Marblehead, Massachusetts, a small fishing village where people didn't really like her. She had a bad attitude, swore at neighbors, and got into arguments a lot. People didn't like dealing with her, and she didn't really care to be liked either. Everyone called her Mammy Red as a label for the village crank. She had already been accused of witchcraft back in 1687, but that went nowhere. No one bothered locking her up then. She went back to yelling at people and doing whatever annoyed things old ladies did in Marblehead. But then 1692 happened, and that trials went beyond Salem's borders. Mammy's name came up again, and this time, things stuck. In May 1692, a bunch of girls from Salem Village started accusing random people of witchcraft. Same old with the one before this. It was a whole dramatic mess, and somehow Wilmot Red got added to their little list of suspects. She got arrested and thrown in jail, even though she lived in Marblehead and barely had anything to do with Salem. When people asked her what she thought of the girls who were supposedly possessed or cursed, not that it mattered, it went like this.
I actually felt bad. They may be having an anxiety attack and no one was willing to help them because they might get trialed. But I didn't expect Salem to reach me. I mean, I was in Marblehead. But yeah, they could have been affected mentally and they needed professional help, really.
Woman, showing empathy, not anger? Wish.
Showing any kind of emotion or acknowledgement of the girl's behavior made people think you were either guilty or part of the problem. So her sympathy got filed under witch vibes by the same bunch running the whole party. She stayed in jail for the summer while the courts did their half-baked investigations. Half-baked means zero in this instance, by the way. Eventually, they brought her to trial in September. Not surprisingly, she didn't stand a chance. She had no friends in town, no big-name supporters, and definitely no patience for pretending to be sweet or holy. Everyone remembered her yelling, her cursing, her general raggedy attitude. That was enough. Reputation counted for more than facts in that courtroom. On the 22nd of September, 1692, Wilmot Red unfortunately passed. That day was basically the final wave of executions in the Salem Witch Trials. After that, the panic started losing steam. People started realizing maybe they'd gone too far, but Wilmot didn't get the luxury of that timing. There's no evidence she did anything remotely criminal. She just pissed off the wrong neighbors and got unlucky enough to get noticed by the witch-hunting crowd. Reflection time. Do you have a bad temper? Yes? Tough luck. How about residents? Are you from Salem? Doesn't matter. Are you an INFP who shows empathy towards others? Would be awesome in today's time, not in Salem. Tuba. Tuba was an enslaved woman who lived in Salem Village in the household of Reverend Samuel Parris. Her exact age is unknown, and even her background's a bit blurry. Some say she was Native American, some say she was of African descent, but most agree she was from the Caribbean, probably Barbados. And no, nobody back then cared enough to be precise about that because she was enslaved, and the whole colony saw her as property more than a person. That alone sets the tone for what happened next. In February 1692, two girls in the Parris house, Betty Parris, who was the Reverend's daughter, and Abigail Williams, his niece, started acting possessed, screaming, throwing fits, crawling under furniture, speaking nonsense, basically doing stuff that made the deeply religious and already paranoid townsfolk lose their minds. One of the kids was the minister's own daughter, so it's going to be a big deal. Naturally, instead of thinking maybe the girls are bored or sick, the adults went straight to Satan, and since Tuba was in the house, foreign, and conveniently voiceless in the community, they turned to her first. She got interrogated hard. That's putting it mildly. She was like interrogated harder than hard until she said exactly what they wanted to hear. Then Tuba confessed. Not just, yeah, okay, I'm a witch, but a full-blown blockbuster confession with demons, black dogs, red cats, a giant man in black, and a creepy book that witches had to sign. She said there was a whole gang of witches working together in Salem, basically gave them a Netflix pilot with enough material for a season and a half. Her confession got so wild that people couldn't look away, and the more she talked, the more names came up. And that's when it snowballed. Her confession kicked off the actual witch hunt. Once she laid it all out, everyone started looking sideways at their neighbors. Oh, she has a mole on her arm? She's probably in the coven. People started accusing each other like it was a hobby. Now, whether Tuba believed any of what she said is anyone's guess. But when you're enslaved and getting threatened by powerful white men in Puritan New England, you say what they want. She probably figured confessing and playing along was safer than resisting. And weirdly, she wasn't hanged like many of the others. So we got a development in the story. Amazingly, even that it was during the genesis of this. Basically, be foreign, play along to what the religious, superstitious, white men want to hear, and you're good. Maybe you have a chance at living here. Mary Warren. Now, Mary's case was one that's often called taste of their own medicine, or karma for short. Mary was 20 years old and working as a servant in the Proctor household when she got dragged into the Salem witch trial. Early on, she jumped straight into the chaos like the rest of the afflicted girls. She threw fits, claimed to see witches, and joined in pointing fingers. She was playing along, doing what the other girls were doing, probably thinking it was just what she was supposed to do to stay out of trouble, or maybe just to be part of something. But by April 1692, she started getting cold feet about it. Her so-called visions stopped. She started backing away from the whole thing like, yeah, maybe this is going too far. That didn't sit well with the other girls. Turning your back on the group? Not the smartest move when your whole town is ready to hang someone over a weird look. So they turned on her fast. They claim she was a witch now, too. Not just a witch, but a fake one, like faking fits, lying about being afflicted, and secretly doing witchcraft. Suddenly, Mary was no longer part of the team. She was the enemy, and she cracked under the pressure. She confessed. She told the court she'd been lying and had actually been using witchcraft on others, and not on her own either. She said the proctors made her do it. That confession was all it took to throw her into jail, and she sat there for months, trying to dig herself out of the hole. Later on, she changed her mind again and tried to say her confession wasn't true. That she just said it because she was scared and wanted it all to stop. But by then, nobody cared. Once you've confessed in front of the court, trying to walk it back is like trying to put toothpaste back in the tube. The damage was done. Her name was ruined, her credibility was gone, and no one was listening anymore. What makes Mary Warren's story so ridiculous is that she shows how unstable the whole witch hunt really was. You could be one of the people accusing others on Monday, and by Wednesday, you'd be the one in chains. There was no protection, no loyalty, no logic. The same system that gave Mary the power to accuse others turned around and ate her alive when she stopped playing along. She didn't get hanged, thankfully. Probably only because the trials were falling apart by the time they got around to her, but she was locked up until 1693 when the whole mess finally ended. After all that, Mary just vanished from history. No one really knows what happened to her. She survived the trials, but she didn't walk away clean. Her name was stained, her life torn up, and her short run in the spotlight ended with her being another example of how bad things got in Salem. Did she die? No. Did she need to move as far from Salem as possible? Yes. Should you do this to survive in Salem? Subjective. Just to give you an idea how desperate Mary was to stay alive during these times, here, Alice Parker. Alice lived in Salem, and she was one of the people Mary accused during the height of the witch trials in 1692. Nobody really knows how old she was, which honestly checks out because historical records back then were about as organized as a toddler's crayon drawings. She was married to a fisherman, and around town, she had a reputation for being religious and weirdly accurate when it came to making predictions. Like one time, she told a friend that her husband was going to die at sea. The dude went fishing, and surprise, he never came back. So of course, in Puritan logic, that meant she was either blessed by God or besties with the devil. The town went with the devil. Things started going south for Alice in May 1692 when Mary Warren happened.
How did you know that the guy was never gonna return? My clairvoyance. It helped me predict what was gonna happen, and honestly, it's not a gift. What is clairvoyance? Oh, that's when you think,
Think witch!
Mary said Alice had bewitched her, which probably meant she tripped or had a headache and needed someone to blame. Not only that, but Mary also said Alice was responsible for a bunch of people drowning. Apparently, being married to a fisherman somehow meant she had dominion over all sea-related deaths. Mary's accusations were so absurd, they'd sound like a parody if people weren't actually being killed over this nonsense. So Alice got dragged into court. She denied everything, hard. She wasn't meeking around. She went in swinging with full-blown denials. But did it matter? Nah. Even if you denied hard, cried blood, or floated on water, and even if you did those, they would most likely believe that you were a witch even more. The court didn't give two flying ducks about logic. They had girls flailing around and claiming invisible specters were pinching them, and that was considered solid evidence. Her clairvoyance, which might have just been common sense mixed with coincidence, got twisted into some kind of diabolical power. The town turned that one ocean prediction into a whole evil resume. She probably couldn't have seen that coming, which is kind of ironic, and the fact that she was devout didn't help either, as everyone was devout. At that point, the court saw piety as either a disguise or proof of possession. Heads, you're a witch; tails, you're still a witch. So, like many of the other poor souls caught in this witch-hunting circus, Alice was convicted, not because of any actual crime, but because she was the right mix of unlucky, weirdly insightful, and surrounded by people who needed a scapegoat. On the 22nd of September, 1692, they hanged her. She was part of the last group of executions before the hysteria finally burned itself out. John Willard. Johnny Boy right here was about 30 years old and lived in Salem Village. He used to be a constable, meaning he was one of the guys actually dragging accused witches off to jail. At first, he went along with it like everybody else. But then he started thinking, wait a second, this is some serious BS. This is not good. These people are not good. He quit his job and told people he didn't buy the whole act, especially from the so-called afflicted girls who were flopping around and screaming about ghosts. He thought they were straight up lying. That was a bad move because not long after he spoke out, one of the main drama queens of the whole witch panic, Ann Putnam Jr., came swinging with one of the most ridiculous accusations on record. She said Willard had witchcrafted her baby sister into the next life. Yeah, apparently he pulled off a magic version of Lee Harvey Oswald. Totally believable, right? But it didn't stop there. His own in-laws, the Wilkins family, jumped on the bandwagon and backed the accusations. Family loyalty was clearly on vacation that year. When the arrest warrant came, Willard was like, nope, and got the heck out of Salem. He made it all the way up to New Hampshire, but this wasn't exactly mission. Impossible. He got caught and dragged back to town. Once he was on trial, it was the usual circus. Confessed witches and afflicted girls swore they saw his ghost, or specter, doing all kinds of rituals like we already know. That was all it took in Salem. No evidence, no proof, just people saying, I saw his invisible ghost do crimes. And boom. That was considered legit testimony. So after getting the most half-baked excuse for a trial, he was found guilty, obviously. On the 19th of August, 1692, they hanged him along with 4 other people. What was Willard's crime again? Oh yeah, not believing. So if you don't believe in everything Puritan back then, pack your bags. And finally, Samuel Wardwell Sr. Sammy was from Andover. He had a reputation as a fortune teller. He wasn't shy about the whole thing either. He read palms, used folk magic, and basically treated the devil like an encyclopedia you could check out if you were curious enough. At some point before the Salem hysteria really picked up steam, he admitted he'd made a deal with the devil to gain knowledge. Not wealth, not power, knowledge. which is hilariously on brand for someone who apparently thought fortune-telling was a viable career move in Puritan Massachusetts. So when the witch trials came around, Samuel found himself dragged into the mess. During his examination, he confessed to practicing witchcraft, not because he thought it would be fun, but because he figured confessing would get him off the hook. That was actually working for a lot of people. Take Tuba and Mary Warren as examples. The court loved a nice juicy confession. Just say you were in league with Satan, give them a few names, act sorry, and you'd usually get to walk away. But then Samuel did something very stupid. After confessing, he backtracked and said the whole thing was a lie. He recanted. That was like flipping off the court in slow motion. In their eyes, a confession was useful. A retraction was basically spitting on their authority. And since the entire system was running on vibes and paranoia instead of actual evidence, Samuel's little U-turn gave the judges the perfect excuse to get rid of him. So he got convicted. No spectral evidence loophole, no technicality. Just, you confessed and now you're wasting our time. On the 22nd of September, 1692, you know how it ended. With the ropes, what made Samuel's case stand out is that he confessed, and they still killed him. That didn't happen often. Most people who confessed, even if they were lying through their teeth, were spared. The court liked confessions because they helped justify the hysteria. Samuel might have gotten away if he'd just kept his mouth shut after the first lie. But his pride or his conscience or his sheer exhaustion got the better of him, and he chose to tell the truth at the worst possible moment. Now that you know which characteristics will make or break your Airbnb experience time traveling to Salem, would you still go? Yeah, didn't think so. See y'all.